The first time I noticed the missing money, I assumed I was wrong. That was my mistake. I was sitting alone in my office late one evening, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, the building long since emptied. My laptop screen glowed with rows of numbers that should have balanced, but didn't. I leaned closer, blinking slowly, scrolling back up. Vendor payments. Outstanding balances. Deferred credits. Everything looked ordinary. Too ordinary. And that's what bothered me. They didn't know what I had already done. My father liked to say he hated busy work. Paperwork bored him. Details annoyed him. He preferred vision, relationships, handshake deals, the kind of leadership that looked impressive from the outside and disastrous up close. So when I'd been promoted into finance oversight, he'd smiled indulgently. Good, he'd said. You like that stuff. Like it was a personality quirk. Like it wasn't the backbone of the company he claimed to protect. I cross-checked the vendor ledger again. Then again. $12,400 here. $27,800 there. Amounts small enough to be ignored individually. But together. $180,000. Not missing. Hidden. My stomach tightened, not with shock, but recognition. Because this wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. The funds were parked across multiple vendor accounts, disguised as advance payments, deferred services, and pending reconciliations. Clean enough to pass a glance. Dirty enough to collapse under scrutiny. And my father had signed off on every one. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For a moment, I considered confronting him directly. Asking him why. Giving him the chance to explain. But then I remembered how he handled questions. With laughter. With dismissal. With authority that relied on people backing down first. So instead, I saved the file. The next morning, he breezed into the office like always. Confident. Loud. Certain. Morning, he said, clapping his hands once. We good for the quarter? I smiled politely. Almost, I said. He didn't notice the emphasis. Good, he replied. I knew I hired you for a reason. I nodded. Because that reason wasn't loyalty. It was precision. For the next 2 weeks, I watched quietly. I pulled historical reports. Tracked timing patterns. Mapped which vendors were used and when. Every trail led back to the same place. Control. He'd hidden the money not to steal it outright, but to move it. Delay taxes. Inflate expenses. Create a private cushion only he could access. A shadow reserve. What scared me wasn't the amount. It was how comfortable he was doing it. One afternoon, as he stood in my doorway, he said casually, "You don't need to dig so deep into vendor stuff. It's old business." I looked up at him. Old business tends to resurface, I said lightly. He frowned. Then smiled. Just don't make problems where there aren't any, he replied. And walked away. That night, I called our external audit firm. Not to accuse. Not to report. Just to ask a question. What triggers a mandatory audit review? I asked calmly. The answer was simple. Material inconsistencies. I thanked them and hung up. The next day, I flagged the discrepancies internally. Routine language. Neutral tone. Proper channels. No accusations. Just documentation. Within 48 hours, the auditors scheduled a review. My father found out immediately. "This is unnecessary," he said sharply, standing in my office. "You should have come to me first." I met his eyes. "I came to the process," I said. He stared at me like I'd spoken betrayal out loud. "They're going to dig," he warned. "You know that." "Yes," I replied. "That's the point." He shook his head. "You don't understand how this works," he said. I smiled faintly. "I do," I replied. "That's why I didn't warn you." What I didn't realize then was how hard he would fight once he understood the auditors weren't coming for the company. They were coming for him. The auditors didn't arrive dramatically. No briefcases snapped open. No tense announcements. No whispered panic in the halls. They came the way accountability always does, politely, professionally, and with time. Which made my father restless. He hated waiting. "They're just confirming routine stuff," he told anyone who would listen. "Nothing to worry about." He said it loudly, repeatedly, like volume could overwrite facts. I watched from my desk as he paced, phone pressed to his ear, laughing a little too hard at jokes no one else could hear. When he passed my office, he paused. "You gave them everything they asked for," he said. "Yes," I replied. "All of it?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Good." But his eyes lingered. Too long. The audit room was 2 doors down from mine. Glass walls. Clear view. I could see them every day. 2 auditors, calm, methodical, working through stacks of records my father had assumed no one would ever connect. They didn't rush. They didn't react. They just followed trails. On the 3rd day, one of them stopped by my office. "Can you clarify something for us?" she asked. "Of course," I said. She placed a report on my desk. A vendor reconciliation. One of the accounts my father had used most. "These prepayments," she said, tapping the page. "They repeat every quarter. Same amounts. Same timing." "Yes," I replied. "They do. Is there a service agreement?" "No," I said calmly. "There isn't." She nodded. No surprise. Just confirmation. That evening, my father cornered me in the parking garage. Concrete echoing. Fluorescent lights humming. "You're enjoying this," he said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I'm finishing it." "You could stop this," he insisted, "before it goes too far." I looked at him then, not as his daughter, not as an employee, but as a professional watching someone cling to control. "It already has," I said. He tried another angle. Concern. "You know what audits do to reputations," he said the next morning. "People talk. They talk more when numbers don't add up," I replied. He stared at me. "You think you're protecting the company," he said. "You're tearing it apart." I leaned back in my chair. "No," I said quietly. "I'm separating it from you." That was the first time he looked afraid. By the end of the week, the auditors requested additional documentation. Historical vendor contracts. Authorization trails. Email approvals. My father's name appeared everywhere. Not mine. Not anyone else's. Just his. He stopped coming into the office early. Started leaving late. I heard raised voices through closed doors. Legal counsel. Accountants. People asking questions he couldn't answer without unraveling everything. On Friday afternoon, the lead auditor requested a final meeting. "With ownership present," she specified. My father scoffed when I told him. "They can talk to me," he said. "I'll explain." I nodded. "You should," I replied. The night before the meeting, I stayed late again. I didn't need to. Everything was already in motion. But I sat there anyway, staring at the spreadsheet where I'd first noticed the discrepancy. $180,000. Not because I cared about the number anymore, but because of what it represented. A choice. Repeated. What my father never understood was this. Auditors don't accuse. They conclude. And once they do, explanations don't matter. The next morning, he wore his best suit. The one he saved for banks and ceremonies. He looked at me before we walked into the conference room. "You don't have to be in there," he said. "This is between them and me." I smiled politely. "I know," I said, and walked in anyway. What I didn't realize then was that the report they were about to hand him would do more than expose the money. It would expose the story he'd been telling himself for years. And once that cracked, there would be no hiding behind authority again. The conference room felt colder than usual. Not because the air conditioning was too high, but because no one was speaking. The auditors sat on one side of the table, folders stacked neatly in front of them. Prepared. Finished. My father sat across from them, shoulders squared, hands clasped like he was about to negotiate instead of listen. I took the chair beside him. Not behind. Not across. Beside. That mattered. The lead auditor cleared her throat. Thank you for making time, she said evenly. We've completed our review. My father nodded once. Good. Let's clear this up. She slid a thick report across the table. Bound. Tabbed. Final. This document outlines our findings, she continued. We'll summarize first. He didn't open it. He smiled, confident. Before you begin, I want to be clear. Any accounting irregularities were strategic timing decisions. Cash management. Not misconduct. She didn't react. That context, she said calmly, is already reflected in our conclusions. That was the first crack. She opened her copy. Over the past 18 months, she began, we identified a pattern of deferred vendor payments and advance credits totaling approximately $180,000. My father's jaw tightened. These funds, she continued, were distributed across 12 vendor accounts and classified under varying expense categories. I watched his hands. They'd stopped clasping. Now they rested flat on the table. However, she said, turning a page, we were unable to identify corresponding service agreements, deliverables, or reconciliation activity. My father leaned forward. That's because. She raised a hand gently. Please allow me to finish, she said. He leaned back. Barely. All authorizations, she continued, were approved by a single executive. She looked directly at him. Which would be you? Silence. Not dramatic. Absolute. I felt it then, the moment when he realized this wasn't a conversation. It was a record. He laughed softly. That's ridiculous, he said. I'm allowed discretion. I've run this company for decades. She nodded once. Discretion does not include undocumented fund concealment, she replied. He turned to me. You knew about this, he said. I didn't answer. Because this wasn't my meeting anymore. The second auditor spoke. In addition, he said, we traced internal communications related to these accounts. He placed several printed emails on the table. My father's handwriting. Scanned notes. Phrases like hold here, keep off main ledger, temporary buffer. He stared at them. Didn't touch them. This constitutes intentional misclassification, the auditor continued, which carries regulatory implications. My father's face reddened. You're blowing this out of proportion, he snapped. It's internal money. The lead auditor met his gaze. Once recorded inaccurately, she said, there is no such thing as internal. I felt my chest tighten, not with guilt, but with inevitability. Because this was the moment. The point of no return. What happens now? My father asked, voice strained. The auditor didn't rush. Our obligation, she said, is to issue this report to the board and recommend corrective action. And, he pressed. And depending on the board's response, she added, external disclosure may be required. He went very still. He turned to me again. You did this, he said quietly. I finally spoke. I let the process do what it's designed to do, I said. That's not the same thing, he snapped. It is, I replied. When the numbers are real. The auditors began packing their materials. This meeting is concluded, the lead auditor said. You'll receive a digital copy by end of day. She paused. One more thing. My father looked up. We recommend immediate suspension of financial authorization privileges, she said. Effective today. He stared at her. Then at me. Then back at the report he still hadn't opened. After they left, the room stayed silent. The hum of the lights sounded louder now. "You could have warned me," he said finally. I stood. "I did," I replied. "With the first spreadsheet." He shook his head slowly. "You wanted to make an example of me." I picked up my bag. "No," I said. "I wanted you to stop before this happened." He slumped back in his chair. For the first time, he looked old. Not powerful. Not untouchable. Just exposed. As I reached the door, he spoke again. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. I paused. "I'm going to let the board read the report," I said. "Just like you will." And I left him there, alone with the truth. What I didn't realize then was that the board's response would be faster and harsher than even the auditors expected, and that by the time my father tried to speak again, the report would already have spoken for him. The board didn't wait. That was the first thing that told me how serious this had become. By the time I reached my office, my calendar was already updating itself, meetings appearing where empty space had been just minutes earlier. Emergency session. Executive only. Legal present. No discussion about if. Only how fast. My father didn't attend the first meeting. Not because he wasn't invited. Because he couldn't. His authorization privileges were frozen the moment the auditor's report was logged. Access revoked. Signatures disabled. Even his company credit card was flagged automatically. Systems don't care about history. They care about rules. The boardroom felt different without him. Lighter. Sharper. Unburdened. The chairwoman opened the meeting without ceremony. "We've reviewed the audit findings," she said. "This is not a misunderstanding." No one argued. Legal counsel summarized implications, regulatory exposure, reputational risk, potential penalties. Every sentence ended the same way. If not addressed immediately. They voted. Not dramatically. Unanimously. Immediate removal from all financial oversight roles. Mandatory disclosure to insurers. Corrective accounting measures initiated. My father's name was spoken like a liability, not a founder. Someone asked me if I was okay. That surprised me. "I am," I said truthfully. "The company will be too." That mattered more. By noon, the internal memo went out. Neutral language. Firm action. No emotion. Following an external audit, leadership responsibilities have been reassigned to ensure compliance and operational continuity. No one asked questions. They already knew. My father called me twice. I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty. Out of necessity. Because once lines blur, control slips. And control, right now, had to remain clean. The first article appeared that evening. Small. Buried. But accurate. No names. No scandal. Just fact. That restraint saved everything. He came to my office the next morning. No warning. No suit. Just a man who'd lost the language of authority and hadn't learned another one yet. "You let them take everything," he said. I closed my laptop. "They protected the company," I replied. He laughed bitterly. "From me?" "Yes," I said. He paced. "They wouldn't exist without me," he said again. I stood. "And they won't survive if they pretend you're above the rules," I replied. That stopped him. "You think this makes you better than me?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "No," I said. "It makes me responsible." The silence between us stretched. Then he said the thing I hadn't expected. I was going to fix it. I looked at him. "When?" I asked. He didn't answer. That afternoon, the auditor's report was officially logged with our insurers. That triggered the final mechanism. Mandatory oversight. External controls. No more quiet adjustments. Everything visible now. The board asked me to stay late. They wanted continuity, stability, someone who understood the systems and the people. I agreed. Not because I wanted power, because power had already arrived. My father sent one last message that night. You chose numbers over family. I stared at it for a long time, then typed back. I chose the truth before it destroyed both. I never got a reply. What people don't tell you about moments like this is how lonely they are. Not because you doubt yourself, but because everyone else is suddenly afraid to say the wrong thing. So they say nothing. The company stabilized quickly. That surprised outsiders. It didn't surprise me. We'd been compensating for him for years. Now we didn't have to. A week later, the board formalized my role. Interim authority. Permanent oversight. Clear mandate. No drama. Just necessity. My father stopped coming around. He didn't fight publicly. Didn't apologize either. Some people can't survive the mirror. What I didn't realize then was that the final reckoning wouldn't come from courts or regulators. It would come quietly, when he finally understood that the report didn't just take his power. It rewrote his legacy. The aftermath didn't look like punishment. That surprised people. There were no court appearances. No public apologies. No dramatic exits. Just absence. And absence, I learned, is the most honest consequence of all. My father didn't lose everything. He lost access. Which, for someone like him, was worse. He still had his name. His history. His stories. But no signature authority. No quiet levers. No rooms that shifted when he entered. The company moved forward without asking his opinion. And that was the part he never recovered from. The auditors closed their file a month later. Corrective actions completed. Funds reclassified. Controls strengthened. The $180,000 was restored transparently, redistributed properly, and logged with brutal clarity. No drama. Just truth in numbers. I signed the final acknowledgement myself. Not triumphantly. Professionally. People began to treat me differently. Not cautiously. Respectfully. They didn't praise me for handling my father. They thanked me for protecting their jobs. Their work. The company they'd helped build. That mattered more than vindication ever could. One afternoon, a junior analyst stopped by my office. I didn't know you could do that, she said quietly. Do what? I asked. Stand up to him, she replied. I smiled gently. I didn't stand up to him, I said. I stood up for the process. She nodded like that was something she'd remember. My father and I spoke one last time months later. Not in an office. Not over documents. At a quiet cafe, far from glass walls and authority. He looked smaller now. Not weak. Just unguarded. I never thought it would be you, he said. I stirred my coffee slowly. It always is, I replied. When people stop paying attention. He smiled faintly. You always notice things, he said. Yes, I agreed. That's why this happened. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't apologize either. Some people can't separate regret from surrender. I didn't push. This wasn't about closure. It was about truth. The company entered its strongest quarter in years shortly after. Clean books. Clear oversight. Renewed trust from partners. One investor said it best during a call. Stability is expensive, he said. You paid for it early. I muted the mic and smiled. Late one evening, I opened the original spreadsheet again. The one where I'd first seen the discrepancy. The numbers were gone now. Replaced with zeros. Balanced. Resolved. I closed the file and shut down my laptop. My father once believed authority meant knowing where the money was hidden. He was wrong. Authority is knowing where it can't hide. Sometimes, when people hear this story, they expect anger. Revenge. A moment where I finally said what I'd been holding back. There wasn't one. Because the most devastating thing I did was let the truth speak without interruption. He hid $180,000 across vendor accounts because he believed no one would look closely enough. He forgot something important. I was already looking. Not because I distrusted him. Because the job required it. I didn't expose him. I didn't accuse him. I didn't even confront him until the report was finished. I simply created a space where facts could no longer be ignored. And then I stepped back. They didn't know what I had already done. Neither did he. By the time the auditors handed him the report, my role was already finished. The company survived. Stronger. Cleaner. Honest in ways it hadn't been before. And my father. He lives with a quieter truth now. Not that he was caught, but that he was seen. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.